But then, after the conference, after I told the story about, being in space and doing the spacewalk and surviving one of the, probably one of the most complex accident ever in spacewalking, imagine when Gene came to me and he's like, "Hey, Luca, that was an incredible story. Can I take a selfie with you?" I think that was probably the highlight of my career as an astronaut.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Our guest today is Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano, the first Italian to walk in space and equally famous for his second spacewalk in which his helmet began to fill with water, posing a danger of drowning while in space. Welcome, Luca.
Thank you for inviting me, Richard. It's really a pleasure being here.
Luca, it's interesting. You have flown into space and, those are always exciting missions. What I always find interesting about people like yourself is there's other missions in life. Like just before you came on here, you had your daughter. She has her tryout for the choir. So you coexist between two worlds.
I think I coexist between multiple worlds, as a matter of fact, multiple realities. And it's true for everybody. There is a side that is incredibly personal, and it's just very much about me, of which I'm not afraid or ashamed. And then there is a side that is for the family. It's where I am a dedicated father that loves to spend time with their daughters. And just like every father, I am, walking this very thin line between being cool and being terrible with my teenage daughters. And then there is a public side, which is what I'm using right now to talk to you and presenting to a vast population. And then there's a professional side and so many others. There is a very famous Sicilian writer, and you with your Sicilian background, you should try and find him. His name is Luigi Pirandello. He was a Nobel Prize winner. He wrote a novel called One, Nobody, and 100,000, talking about the many faces that we just have to wear in our lives.
You mentioned my Sicilian background, and you and I have discussed it a little. You grew up in Catania, Sicily, which has Greek ruins. You have Mount Etna. You look over the Ionian Sea. And I dare say this, you probably have the best food in the world there. So what's it like growing up in Catania? And how does that relate to actually becoming an astronaut?
The second question is pretty hard. Let's try to answer the first one. As far as I can recall, I just had a wonderful, wonderful childhood growing up. You don't realize it, but people go to Catania and the surrounding areas for vacation because of the wonderful weather, because of the wonderful scenery, our sea, the mountains, the food. But when you're growing up, that's just your city. And you don't realize that it's a wonderful place to be at. And then when you move away, you start looking at it from far away, from many other places that you've seen. And you're like, wow, my island really is a wonderful place. And that, in a way, explains my memories of childhood being so wonderful. I had a very simple family. My parents were teachers. And like teachers all over the world, they did not make a lot of money, but they did everything they could to make my brother and I feel taken care of, and we didn't miss anything. We didn't want anything. To answer your second question, I believe that my desire to move away or to be something different came from my grandfather from my mom's side. He was the first and only professional military in our family until he gave up the military career to go back to his hometown and become a policeman, and then eventually the commander of the police force in the town. Maybe you are born with that sense or desire for discipline, but that's the earliest memory I have of wanting to join the military or to fly. And it's hard to relate my career to growing up in Sicily. I think I just had it in me that's what I wanted.
Well, it's interesting because let's face it, everybody is from someplace. And, is there ever the perfect place to grow up to do anything, right? I suppose some of the earlier astronauts, they all lived either in Houston or in Florida, and they all lived in close proximity. So you knew other astronauts or you knew their families. But was there sort of a moment when do you remember your earliest space moments? For me, it really was the Apollo missions. You're younger than me. So what was your first space sort of memories?
In a way, being in Sicily is as far away as you can be from a professional world like the one of astronauts. There was nothing in Catania, in the periphery of Europe, really of Italy, that would take me to space. So I think that what my earliest memory and connection to space is TV and the space shuttle. I just remember that growing up with Japanese cartoons about space and space battles and, space monsters, space invasions and aliens and robots, in my childhood fantasies, the world of spacefaring of the anime and the first space shuttle missions that were happening as I was growing up, and even the collective memory of the Apollo missions, they were all one big reality mixed with fantasy. And I know that because one of my very earliest memories was when I was learning to swim between 3 and 4 years old. And I was in a swimming pool. I remember that my big brother, he was already swimming in a big boys pool, and I was in the kiddie pool. And I remember this very, very, very clearly because I wanted to learn how to dive like my brother. And there was this trainer, maybe a young teenager, and she wanted to break the ice with these kids, 3, 4 years old, all in the kiddie pools. And what's the easiest thing to ask a bunch of kids? Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there is always the one that wants to be a firefighter. There's the one that wants to be a doctor. And I remember that I said, I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. Now, I might as well have replied, I want to be Spider-Man. It was exactly in the same fantasy world, but that's the first time I said I want to be an astronaut. And then I remember that growing up, there was one definite moment when I was already, in school, maybe 7 or 8 years old or 9, when I understood for the first time that we had been to the moon, but we were not on the moon at that moment. I just assumed that people were going to the moon with the space shuttle and were walking on the moon. And there was this moment, this haha moment where I realized, hey, we only been there 6 times a long time ago. I wasn't even born and we're not there anymore. But at the same time, I thought this must be the coolest job that you could ever have growing up. So space was there in the environment, in the air, in the minds of people as this amazing, amazing place. And then in my life, it disappeared for many years because, again, I grew up in Sicily and my parents were teachers. And so, like many other kids, I thought, hey, I'm going to be a teacher one day, which in a way I am. But being an astronaut was truly, truly a dream.
I'm not sure if you realize this, but the first astronaut born in Italy was actually Michael Collins, who was born in Rome. In your career, did you ever talk to any of those Apollo guys or Gemini guys and sort of compare notes?
I have. It is one of my fondest stories because I talked to Collins from space, from orbit. He was a mission control center, and we were celebrating because we launched on the 50th anniversary of the moon landing on July 20th of 2019. So exactly 50 years after the moon landing. That was from far away. However, I did get a personal chance to talk to one of the astronauts that I really, really admire and that I consider truly a mentor and an inspiring figure, and it's Gene Cernan.
Sure.
I met Gene Cernan just really briefly at the flight clinic where we were both getting our physical one day. We just crossed and I was like, holy smokes, that's Gene Cernan. And I just stood up and I said, sir, I don't want a selfie. I just want to introduce myself because I just want you to know that I am incredibly honored just to be in your presence. And I just told him that, and he was very appreciative of the fact that I was not invasive at all. And then imagine when 2 years later, I found myself sitting at the same table at a conference about spaceflight and spacewalks. I was in a conference table sitting next to Gene Cernan, And next to the first Russian to ever perform an EVA, first person ever, I was next to Alex Leonov and spacewalk legend Chris Cassidy, who's also one of my good friends. And I was sitting at this table in a conference, like, what am I doing among these legends? But then, after the conference, after I told the story about, being in space and doing the spacewalk and surviving probably one of the most complex accidents ever in spacewalking, imagine when Gene came to me and he's like, "Hey, Luca, that was an incredible story. Can I take a selfie with you?" I think that was probably the highlight of my career as an astronaut. My admiration towards them is infinite, especially now that I have experienced some of the emotions and the complexities of spaceflight. To imagine that they did it with 1/10 of the computing power of a telephone that we have today it's almost unbelievable.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. I think a lot of people think of them as world heroes because NASA, everybody felt like they were part of during that time period. So how were you eventually selected for the astronaut for ESA, which is the European Space Agency? So how did that selection process happen?
To me, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, I just had this idea that, hey, you want to be an astronaut? You have to be like Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Paul Collins. You have to be a test pilot. And I was like, well, I would love to fly. And I would love to fly fast, and I would love to fly low, and I would love to fly high. So I'm going to try out for the Italian Air Force Academy because that's the way to become a pilot, right? So I didn't know that in Italy, it's not like in the US where you apply and you have a letter of recommendation, and then you go to the Air Force Academy, which is like a huge college in Colorado. But in Italy, the Air Force Academy is sized for Italy. So we have about maybe 80 cadets per year, and about 10 times the number apply. So actually 100 times, because we have about 8,000 applications every year, and you go through a selection process that lasts about eight months. It's pretty tough, but as soon as I finished high school, I applied and I got in, and we were all surprised. We were like, "Wow, that great, cool." So, and I went to the Air Force Academy, which is a 4-year college, and then I actually was transferred to the United States, not too far away from where we are. I'm in Houston right now, and the flight school I went to is in Wichita Falls. It's called Sheppard Air Force Base. Very famous among the pilots world because it's probably one of the best schools in the world to get your wings. After that, I became a fighter pilot. I went back to Italy. I flew as a fighter pilot for 7 years. And then I had 3 options. One, I could stay a fighter pilot and go through the whole chain, until I became a squadron commander, wing commander, and so on. The second option was to try for the aerobatic team. Italy has a very famous aerobatic team, the Frecce Tricolori, very celebrated. They do beautiful aerobatics, and it's a super cool team. And I had the chance to join them. But what I really wanted to do was be a test pilot, because, hey, that's the road to become an astronaut. And if you don't, you're a test pilot, which would be awesome. You get to fly a little bit of everything. In Italy, the way it works is that you can't apply to be a test pilot. The Air Force has to indicate you to go through a selection. And in order to be in that selection, you have to be in the top 10% of your class and come from a fighter pilot community. So I was lucky enough to be in that small group of people, and I went through the selection, and sure enough, luckily enough, I got selected. And
I think you're being very modest, because there's a lot of, you keep saying luckily. You had to have been a good student in high school. You had to have been good in the academy. And then when you were flying as a test pilot, you had to be good.
I have a hard time measuring those kind of things, because in my experience, It's always a matter of situation and context. And this is what I mean. When I was selected as a test pilot, my classmates that participated with me, they're all good. They still are. But at that moment, I just happened to be the right man at the right time because my family situation, because of my background in that moment, because of what the Air Force was looking in their test pilots. Let's say that they had been looking for a specific qualification that was only for Eurofighter or Typhoon drivers. Then if they were looking for that kind of specification, then I would not have been the right candidate. But at that moment, with the amount of training I'd had and the right airplane and the right missions and everything coming together, I just was the right guy. So a little bit is part of just trying to be the best of what you can be, but a lot of it is just context. And the exact same thing I'm going to say, it's for becoming an astronaut. I got my test pilot certificate and I thought this is the best place I can be. I'm a test pilot. I'm flying anything from helicopters to cargos to fighters. And then ESA came out with a selection. And I thought, okay, wow, selection for astronauts. And my first thought was, I am the newest test pilot in my squadron. There's no way they're going to select me. So why try? That was my very first thought. And I told my friends, I'm like, no, this is not the right time for me. I'm too young. I don't have enough experience. I should just wait for the next selection when I have more experience and I am more competitive. And, my good friends were like, okay, if that's what you say, fine. But none of them was really supportive of that motivation. And then one morning, this is one of those pivoting moments. I was having coffee with my current squadron commander, the chief of the test pilot squadron. So the most experienced test pilot in the squadron. I was having coffee with him, and he looks at me and he's like, "So you're going? You said that you wanted to be an astronaut. Have you applied for the selection?" And I'm like, "No, sir. I'm the youngest one in the squadron, so I don't think I have a chance." He looked at me and he's like, "Well, if you don't apply, you certainly don't have a chance.
Yeah,
you should apply anyway." And then I was like, "Well, it was the pivoting moment. It's like, well, if my squadron commander thinks that I can, then I probably should." That same day, I did the whole application online and got all the certificates and all the papers. And over the course of a couple of days, I put all the package together and then send it in. And then almost exactly a year later, I was being introduced to the public as one of the newest astronauts.
But how did you find out? That's one of those moments you stare or you just feel numb.
Around a year later, after making it all the way to the final interview, we knew that there were 10 of us and that they were going to announce 4 to 6 candidates. About a week before they were going to announce the new astronauts, I was in Finland. They said they are going to announce the candidates on May 20th. This is May 10th, and I haven't gotten anything. I had, my cell phone is always on 24/7. My emails, I'm checking almost obsessively, and I haven't heard anything. I think I'm out. The weekend before that, I'm so demoralized. I'm like, I did my best.
Close.
And so close, and yet so far, so close. And, I'm just trying to think of a way to go on, with my test flying career. I'm like, this is still a great job. I still know what I'm doing. And it's Monday. I'm in France with my family, and it's 9:00, 3 days before the announcement. And I get a phone call. And I look at the phone, and it's a French number calling me. And the headquarters is in Paris. I must have stared at it for like 10 seconds before replying, before answering. This is 9:00 in the evening on Monday. Again, remember, they are announcing on Wednesday, and it's Monday night, 9:00. I answer the phone, and it's Mr. Kronthaler, who was one of the directors of ESA, who had interviewed me for the last interview. And he said, "Hey, this is Kronthaler, Luca." Yeah, talking to him. "How are you doing?" And I replied, "It depends on what you tell me in the next 5 seconds." And he said, "Well, do you think you can make it to Paris next Wednesday?" And my reaction is that I started crying.
I don't blame you.
I started crying.
That's a big deal. I think you have to put that feeling in a bottle, because in life, There's so many ups and downs. And those are moments that are so special because the realization of, again, you mentioned looking at the TV and seeing astronauts and cosmonauts, and suddenly you're going to be one of them. And then, I guess, you go through the training, and then at some point it's announced that you're going to be the first Italian to walk in space, which maybe is not as good as being on the World Cup soccer team in Italy, but that's pretty close.
Well, maybe not for an Italian, but for me, it was a lot more than being on the national soccer team. At one point in around 2012, NASA did assign me, together with a very experienced astronaut, Chris Cassidy, that was mentioning, that we were going to perform 2 spacewalks for repairs and the reconfiguration of the space station. I was going to perform an EVA, an extravehicular activity, and we had the special training, and just the excitement of having that opportunity is beyond description, really, because just the way the announcement that I was going to be an astronaut was a life-changing moment. The idea of being a spacewalker was a career opportunity and an incredible professional achievement.
So, Luca, I am running out of time, and I do have to, now if there's ever a time to sort of tell a great story or make fun of oneself, when you think of all the things that can happen to an astronaut, drowning in space is not one of them. And a mutual friend of ours, Richard Garriott, who's also an astronaut, said one of the best stories he's ever heard is your story of your second spacewalk when your helmet began to fill with water.
It is a good story, and the reason why it is a good story is that I'm here to tell it.
It's always better, right? When it's happening, it's not such a fun.
It's a lot better when I'm here. Than big spoiler alert. It went well, but the story is actually pretty simple. On my first EVA, once Chris and I came back from a very, very successful EVA, we'd repressed the airlock, and my helmet fogged up completely. And when we took the helmet a couple of minutes later, I had my comm cap, the one that we call the Snoopy cap, was completely drenched. And Karen is like, Luca, how did you get so much? How did you sweat so much? How did you get so much water and so much fog? And I'm like, you know what? I think my water bottle, the one that we wear inside the suit, I think it might have leaked during repress. And silly me, I'm a rookie. I'm a rookie astronaut and I'm a rookie spacewalker. I just didn't even realize it. Ha ha ha. And Chris is like, yeah, that's possible. And so we completely dismissed this first incident. We just replaced the water bottle. We said, it's probably a damaged bike bottle. So we threw it away. And a week later, July 16th, we were back going back outside. And I was going out first. I was going to be leading the EVA. It was going to be awesome. And so my first task was to lay out some cables, which may sound mundane, but if you can imagine a bunch of snakes moving around because they have a life of their own, it is not easy. So that was my first task. And then I got to my second task, and Chris and I were like 40 minutes ahead of our schedule. So we were like, we are rocking. We are a great team. And my second task was actually to do a capability test. The ground asked me to wedge myself into a very tight space to see if you can perform some maintenance tasks. So I wedged myself in there and I was talking. I was like, yeah, I can do this motion. I can do this. I can do that. It's all good. And then after we did this test, I pushed myself back out. And in doing the motion, I felt water in the back of my head. And that surprised me because you can sweat and there can be a little bit of water inside a little bit of humidity, but not what I felt. So I told the ground. I did not say, Houston, I got a problem. That I'm very proud of that. I told Shane Kimbrough, who is currently in orbit, I said, Shane, just FYI, for your information, I feel some water in the helmet. And there have been instances where you have some water return in the helmet, and it's never been problematic. But then we started talking about it because I felt this feels like a lot more water than a little bit of return. And for about 20 minutes, we kept going back and forth. Okay, is it coming from your water bottle? And I'm like, nope, I sucked it dry, and there's no more water in there. It's not coming from the bottle. And then Chris came by from where he was, and he started looking. He's like, yeah, I see the water. It's on the side of your head. I'm like, yeah, I feel it creeping, and now I feel it covering my bald noggin. And my only concern at that point was, if the water gets inside my ears, then it's just like when you're under the shower and you get water in your ear that you don't hear really well. And that was my only concern, because if you hear from one side but not from the other, it's really a nuisance. I never thought it was going to be a problem, but I had two thoughts in my head. One, man, don't let it get into my ears, because that's going to be annoying to spend 6 hours talking with just hearing on one side. And two, please don't send me back inside. I just want to finish my job. There's so many people on the ground, not for some water. Oh, and I had a third concern. Like, did I break something? Wedging myself and bumping the backpack around in the structure. Did I break something? Always a concern for any astronaut or any pilot. At one point, I felt the water reaching my forehead, and that's when I told, "Hey, Chris, it feels like there's a whole lot of water, and it continues growing." And from the ground, this has been 27 minutes now going back and forth. They heard that, and they're like, "Okay, Luca, we hear your concern. The plan, we're going to suspend this EVA. Terminate is the term. You have terminate and abort. If you terminate, life as usual. You just go back, you finish up, you put everything back in the best possible way, and then you go back. If it's an abort, you're just going as fast as you can back to the airlock." This was a terminate case, so they were just going to send us back, and I was going to go back, and Chris was going to put everything nice and pretty, and then follow me. Unfortunately, he was going to follow me from a completely different route, because the choreography of the EVA had us in such a way that we could not be routing our safety tethers on the same side of the station. So even though we were collocated, our paths were completely on opposite side of the station. This is important, because when they told me to go back, I looked at Chris, and we had this moment of very clear understanding that I would have loved for him to come back with me, and he wanted to come back with me, but we couldn't because of this routing. So I said, "Okay, Chris, I'll see you at the airlock." And I start translating back again with this water bubble. Imagine this water bubble around my head. As I was navigating around the different parts of the station, you have to change your orientation, because there are things that are called no-touch zones, either because you can damage them or because they can damage your suit. So you kind of have to navigate in 3 dimensions. One of these paths had me moving upside down. So I had to do this motion where all at once my legs were pointing up, my head was pointing down. And like in the best stories, 3 things happened at the same time. I went upside down. The water shifted and covered my eyes, my nose, and my ears. And the sun set, all at exactly the same time. Now, if you think of a sunset on the ground, it's something quite enjoyable. You look at it for half an hour, all the different colors. But in orbit, it happens in an instant. When the sun sets is, hey, there's light, and now there's no light, there's nothing. It's pitch black, and because there is no atmosphere, there's no refraction. The lights that you have on the helmet only create a cone about this big. Then there is nothing on the outside of the cone of light. And with my eyes covered in water and my nose completely filled with water because of capillary effect, it just filled up. Bloop. Now I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't see anything. When I tried to communicate to the ground saying that I was in trouble, I called Chris, I called the ground, I called the station. I had no answer. Wow. They couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear them. So let's say that at that point was a little less than comfortable, because again, the other thought I had is, how much time do I have? Because I think that water keeps coming, and is it going to fill up my helmet? So I had a couple of choices in my mind. Because I was disoriented at that point, I really, it was only my second spacewalk, and as a rookie, I thought maybe I can wait here until Chris realizes that something's wrong and comes look for me. But how much time do I have before the water reaches my mouth? And then you can't breathe if your nose is plugged. So first of all, I didn't know where the water was coming from, if it was even drinkable. but I didn't know how much time I had. So I decided that the only option for me was to go back. But how do you go back when you don't see anything? It's not like you can just let go and hope to get back. You have to navigate a very specific route. So I went back to my basic training where I'm like, okay, I know what the station looks like. And I know with my gloves, I have to feel the handles, the right handles for me to get back. And the only way I could tell which way to go was because we have the safety tether with about 1.5 of force, kind of pulling you a little bit. And I knew that the safety tether was pointing me in the right direction. The problem with the safety tether is that it's a metallic cable. If you get wrapped around it, you are really, really in trouble. So you have to be careful about how you manage it. From that moment starts 8 minutes where I am constantly talking to the ground, telling them, this is where I think I am and this is what I think I'm doing. And the ground hears nothing. So they have no idea that I'm in trouble until about 7 minutes later, when I finally navigate myself completely in the blind to the airlock. And now I have a direct line of sight with the ground, and they hear this communication. I'm at the airlock. Pause. There's a lot of water. That's the first sentence that they hear. And I didn't even remember saying that. I found out that I said that about 6 months later when I heard the recording, because it was very unusual of me to say something like that, because to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't communicate any information. But I guess that at that point, it was something that was really not only on my head, but in my head that, this is not normal. This is bad. When I got to the airlock, luckily the light inside was on. We always leave it on. And so once I opened the thermal cover, I had a much better sense of where I was and how to get in. So I got myself in, and then Chris, a couple of minutes later, at the speed of light, he came in, he came inside, he checked everything, closed the door, the hatch of the airlock. And Karen Nyberg, our IV intravehicular astronaut, she started repressurizing, and I had to do all the motions by memory because there are things that you have to do. You have to attach your umbilical, you have to flip some switches, and I couldn't hear any of the instructions. So I was just doing it based on my training. And then there was this repressurization. And when you repressurize a little bit, when you're landing from an airplane, your ears start popping, but I couldn't pop them because I had water in my nose. And when I tried to plug it using our little Valsalva system, it sheared off. It was so full with water, so wet, that I have this image of it shearing off and floating in front of my eyes. So I had this terrible pain in my ears. I could not hear anything because of that. And I kept telling Karen, slow down, because of the pain in my ears, but she couldn't hear me. Nobody could hear me. And then I felt Chris squeezing my glove. What I didn't know is that the ground was calling me, constantly saying, Luca, how are you? Luca, what's the situation? Luca, report. And I couldn't hear anything. They couldn't hear me. And then when Chris squeezed my glove, I just, when you squeeze somebody's hand, what are you going to do? You squeeze back. And Chris managed to look at me through his helmet and said to the ground, Luca is fine. He's miserable. He looks miserable, but he's fine. And that was pretty much it. That's what it was. I was just standing still because anytime I moved, the water would slosh and get into other places, very uncomfortable. But I remember that when finally the repressurization was open, they opened the hatch. I saw the faces of Karen and the other crew members, and the look on their face was so worried that I got emotional because I could feel how much they cared. And then, a few minutes later, they're finally putting me in position, and they were able to remove the helmet. And we found probably 1.5 pounds of water in the helmet, which it's a lot of water when you consider how small the helmet is. But, once the helmet was taken off, they started asking the ground, hey, how is Luca? And I could hear them, and now they could hear me. And I said, hey, I'm still alive, and you can ask me directly. I just quipped it because that was it. That was over. The situation was over. And when you go back and think about it, to me, that day was actually a very good day because we discovered a few things. First of all, we discovered why the helmet got flooded, and now that's not going to happen again. And then we found out that the training that we get really is a great training because it helps you not only solve contingencies that you have a checklist to follow, but also those emergencies where you don't. And thirdly, I really realized that both the ground crew and the space crews are just they're just made up about very good people that care and that will do anything they can to get you out of a tight spot. So here I am telling the story many years later, and I still think it was a very good day.
It's incredible. And beyond the great story that I'm sure you've regaled many times, what it does bring to mind for me is the importance of an apprenticeship of skills. You have to have done activities so many times. It's like tying your shoe. I could be half asleep, I could be unconscious, and somehow my fingers would tie a shoelace because I've done it so many times. And I think that is very much the test pilot mentality. And really, astronaut mentality is you go through a lot of training, and then, you slow down your head even during an emergency to think, okay, let me methodically think what I have to do. And that really speaks so much to a tradition of space travel, that guys are always trying to figure things out and they're problem solvers.
Absolutely. One thing that I always tell people and, cadets or students is you cannot first solve one problem at a time. And secondly, focus on the solution, not on the problem. So at that moment in time, I didn't know where the water was coming from. I had no idea. And honestly, I didn't care. I just wanted to solve the problem, which was get back to the airlock. That's what I need to do. There was one other silly thought that was in the back of my head, kind of on the backside. And it was the funny part is like, I really don't want to be the Italian astronaut that drowned in space, because that's not going to look good. So
that's great. Hey, Luca, what I really enjoyed is not as much that you're a great astronaut or test pilot, because you really are, but it's really the spirit of how you conduct your life that, from my perspective, has been the most inspiring. And I think that whole idea of working towards the greater cause has a lot of merit in today's society. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for your words, Richard, and thank you for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.